Hello, hello everyone. It's my pleasure to give a presentation today for you. I am Yevgen Pylypchuk, and the title of my presentation is Immobilization of Boronic acid derivative onto the magnetic gadolinium-containing composites. I represent the Institute of Environmental Geochemistry of National Academy of Science of Ukraine. So if you ask me why do we need to develop such a composites containing both boron and gadolinium, I can tell you that such composites can be used as neutron shielding materials. For example, here you can see metal door which contain inside these blocks of borated polyethylene sheets, which actually can be used on objects with high radiation risk to protect personnel and other things from neutral shielding. You can see these polyethylene blocks, they are cheap, they have affordable price, they are lightweight, and they are available at large scale. You can, for example, buy them in internet. But if I ask you, are they eco-friendly, are they recyclable, and did any consideration about their sustainability was taken into account when they were developed? And unfortunately, we cannot say so. So there is a problem that materials for nuclear power plants and other plants where radiation risk is high usually developed without consideration about sustainability. And that's why it's important to introduce new materials which can have high neutron shielding capacity, but also they are sustainable. So here briefly I can show you that, for example, if you have metal sheet, for example, made from lead or steel, you can see that alpha particles and gamma radiation cannot penetrate it. But for example, neutrons can easily penetrate it, and it causes risk for example, for human or other living objects. And if you check isotopes with highest neutron cross-section, you can see that it is boron, cadmium, and gadolinium isotopes. So for example, cadmium was used recently very often for neutron shielding materials, but there is a problem that cadmium is highly toxic both for human and for nature. So there is a shift towards usage of boron and gadolinium in such a material. So for example, here you can see neutron absorption cross-section of boron, and you can see it's very high in the range of thermal and epithermal neutrons. That's why actually boron is a great candidate for this. So you can see the reaction which is happening with boron while it's interacting with neutrons. Basically, it generates lithium isotopes after reaction. And that's why we decided to develop such a composite which should contain both gadolinium and boron. For example, here you can see the scheme for synthesis of these magnetic gadolinium-containing particles. You can see electron microscopy image of them. And then we use this chemical, it's called aminopropyl tritoxysilan, to modify the particle surface to introduce amino groups. Why it's needed you can see on next slide, but here you can see the proof that we have these amino groups because you see this doublet in this region, and which confirms the presence of amino groups. Here you can see the photograph of such stabilized particles. So while we knew that we have these amino groups, we use this boron containing component called formyl-furyl boronic acid, and actually it can react with amino group and form this kind of conjugate on the surface. So we can see, we can observe that reaction has happened. For example, we can see this double bond in this range, and which confirms that the reaction happened as we expected to it. So basically now we can say that we have this gadolinium-boron containing composite. Another one important feature of this boron components that some boronic acid can react with cis-diol compound, like for example Alizarin Res S, On next slide, I show you why it's important, but here you can just see that, for example, when we interact our boron component with Alizarin Res S, it changes color, and basically it's quenched from non-fluorescent state to fluorescent state. And also you can see that we have shift in absorption. So for example, if Alizarin Res S absorbed at 550 nanometers, 15 nanometers, it shifts a little bit to 425. And this feature is very important because it's also pH dependent. And so while we have this composite with boron on the surface, and it has this boronic acid moiety, it can interact with Alizarin Res S and form such kind of complex on the surface, where we have both boron and Alizarin Res S covalently bound to the surface. And this is very important feature because we can actually use, for example, fructose or other sugars, which can bind to this compound, and basically substitute it because of competitive absorption and form this kind of component, and then Alizarin Res S release to the solution. And thus, having such complicated system, we can estimate how much boron or boronic acid we have on the surface. So for example, you see here, like we add in different concentration of sugar from low to high, and you can see how the peak of Alizarin Res S increasing. You remember it was at 515 nanometers. So of course it reached the plateau, and when it reached the plateau, it was possible to calculate how much sugar this composite consumed, and basically we can recalculate it to amount of boronic acid on the surface, and you can see that it is 1.76 millimole per gram of boronic acid on the surface, which is, we can say, quite good result. So the amount of boron is quite high for such a composite. And this is a very important feature because we can actually estimate amount of boron we have in our composite, and for example, if it was involved in some kind of neutron reaction, after that reaction we can estimate how much boron left. So basically such a structure allows us to detect how much boron left after the reaction with neutrons, and it allows us to estimate the resource of our material. Like, for example, we can make a decision, use this composite again, extended use, or for example, that composite need to be replaced because we don't have enough boron and it doesn't have good neutron absorption capacity. And basically that's it. So if I want to summarize as a conclusion, I can say that we have developed such a boron-containing composite with gadolinium. We used the bottom-up approach for this, and the formation of this furfuryl boronic acid conjugate with alizarin allow us to, first of all, fluorescently determine amount of boron on the surface. Also, it allows us to check the resource, how long our material can be used under some certain conditions. And also we can say that this composite changes the color of sugar-containing solution. So basically it can also be used as a sugar detector or sugar sensor in different solutions. So future plans is to use this composite into polymer matrix. For example, we would like to use some wood-derived polymer matrix like cellulose and lignin. And we want to make a magnetic actuator membrane, which actually will be shielding on demand. For example, when we turn on electricity, we turn on magnetic field, and then we close the loop. And for example, we can have neutron shielding, or for example, we can switch it off if needed. So I would like to thank you for your attention, and if you would like to discuss anything, please contact me or my colleagues, and we will be happy to answer all your questions. Thank you for your attention.